As you can probably guess, the word memoir is French for memory. The memoir writer's most important tool is not the word processor nor the thesaurus, but his or her own memory. Sometimes we read a memoir with incredulity because even if the event being discussed is believable, the detail with which some memoirs describe minor details of long past events, word-for-word dialogue, facial expressions, sounds and smells, seems to defy the capacity of human recollection. At the same time, anyone can think of particular moments from the distant past in their own lives that they can remember with surprising vividness. The common sense model of memory compares it to a photograph. It gets grayer and less distinct with the passage of time. In fact, however, some memories from the distant past remain more distinct than memories of things that happened much more recently. A person might remember a 30-year-old encounter in higher definition than what they had for breakfast that morning. The most enduring memories seem to crystallize around moments of intense emotion, an unusually serene moment of peace, a state of intellectual or physical excitement, a time of emotional distress. These are the moments that become imprinted on the mind with particular emphasis. This may be the reason why memoirs as a genre tend to be about suffering, heartbreak, illness, addiction, and other kinds of trauma. If we had to speculate about why memory works in this way, a persuasive answer is supplied by evolutionary psychology, the science of how the human mind has been shaped by evolution over millions of years. Brains eat up a lot of energy. In order to form a memory, an animal has to expend energy to move neurons around in the relevant configurations. If the brain tried to remember everything, it would use up its share of metabolic energy very quickly. The brain has to decide what to remember and what not to remember, and a reliable clue that the brain has learned over millions of years is that if the body is in a state of excitation, then something important is going on, so roll the cameras. In the first chapter of her memoir, The Memory Palace, Mira Bartok comments on the biological underpinnings of human memory as a way of introducing her own approach to the craft of memoir. Neuroscientists, she writes, now suggest that while the core meaning of a long-term memory remains, the memory transforms each time we attempt to retrieve it. In fact, anatomical changes occur in the brain every time we remember. Western philosophical traditions have made most of us accustomed to thinking of the brain and the mind as two different things. The brain, it is believed, is just a gross, squishy mass of tissue, whereas the mind contains our identities, our memories, our aspirations, and our humanity. Bartok's neuroscientific approach to memoir writing, however, confronts readers with the fact that the mind is the brain, and vice versa. The conventional memoirist, Fry, for example, if he were telling the truth, shows you an episode from his past with a cinematic clarity, as if it were happening right in front of you. Such a memoir seems to come out of a mind rather than a brain, because it is not subject to the lapses, ambiguities, and uncertainties that characterize brains as organs. Bartok's memory fades in and out of periods in her life without a real sense of continuity. Significant others come and go. When she tells a memory of being abandoned by her mother in a museum as a child, she tells 3 different versions of it, unable to say which one is true. Her memoir is a shifting tracery of images and associations. This is what it's like to remember as a brain. Unlike minds, brains are imperfect and prone to deterioration. If Bartok is right that the memory transforms each time we attempt to retrieve it, then the very act of remembering itself results in a distortion of the memory. According to this theory, remembering is actually always misremembering, and the more we remember something, the more it changes into something else from what it originally was. At the same time, Bartok insists that, quote, the core meaning of a long-term memory remains, unquote, implying that while the details of a memory might become distorted, the memory's significance in the psychological life of the rememberer remains true to its source. Bartok's distinction among different levels of a memory's truth, a perspective that may make us more sympathetic to James Fry, is one that comes about from a brain-based approach to memoir writing. Brains, of course, are also vulnerable to catastrophic events like car accidents and schizophrenia. Bartok's fascination with the brain as the substrate of human memory results from her direct experience of the manner in which trauma to the physical organ, the brain, affects the workings of memory, as well as every other aspect of human personality. Bartok's mother, the figure at the center of her memoir, is a victim of schizophrenia, an imbalance of neurochemicals in the brain which has dramatic and frightening effects on the behaviors and thought processes of the afflicted individual. Bartok's depiction of her mother is not one in which schizophrenia, a condition of the brain, has run away with her mother's mind. Rather, Bartok represents schizophrenia as a basic element of who her mother is. Would our mother really have been happier medicated in some kind of home or hospital ward, Bartok asks? Would she have studied ancient geology, memorized all the state flowers and birds, the bones in the body? Would she have studied the movements of the stars? While Bartok describes moments of true horror in her narrative of her mother's schizophrenia, she also builds her own life around the same eclectic interests in folklore, art, the natural sciences, and other arcana that electrified her mother. Her own personal wanderings around the globe and among different professional pursuits echo the homelessness of her mother, suggesting that Mira is actually walking in her mother's schizophrenic footsteps, trying to discover through her own efforts the meaning that might have lain behind her mother's deranged, yet often profound, utterances. Many cultural anthropologists have suggested that schizophrenics were revered as shamans in pre-industrial societies, and that much of our religious lore and folk tales owe their origins to the neurochemical imbalances of people who today would be plied with thorazine and hospitalized. Who knows how much of language, art, and human culture represent the echoing voices of prehistoric schizophrenics? Bartok's sensitivity to art and lore is of a piece with her inquiry into the meaning of her mother's life, as if she can piece her mother's mind together out of her fragments of multicultural arcana. Bartok might be justifiably criticized for romanticizing her mother's condition. To Bartok's question of whether her mother would be better off medicated in a hospital, better, that is, than suffering from agonizing loneliness on bus station benches, many people, especially healthcare professionals, would be inclined to answer yes. At the same time, Bartok's memoir provides a compelling example of how to see a person with mental illness as a complete person. A person with mental illness is not just a person with mental illness, but the mental illness is indelibly part of who they are. In a society where we are quick to stamp out anything that makes us uncomfortable, whether through psychiatric medications, antibiotics, or military action, Bartok deserves credit for attempting to be true to the totality of her mother as both a person and a person with a mental illness. For Bartok, after all, understanding the truth of her mother is closely associated with her own self-understanding. Of course, Bartok's mother was her mother and played an enormous role in the development of the person whom Bartok would become. As painful, absurd, and disorienting as her mother's behavior might have been, Bartok needs to confront it in order to understand the way her mother's illness has shaped her own life. But Bartok also needs to understand the truth of her mother as a brain, because Bartok also shares her mother's condition of being the victim of an injury to the brain that is just as random as her mother's schizophrenia. Having suffered a coup-counter-coup concussion in a car crash, Bartok experiences firsthand the manner in which neurology is identity. Her ability to concentrate, her ability to perform basic mental tasks, and of course her memory have all been impacted by this blow to her neocortical tissue. The book itself is Bartok's attempt to work with her brain to build a memory palace where her life will be arranged as neatly and as accessibly as the bones in labeled drawers in a museum. Her construction of this edifice, memory by memory, artifact by artifact, is an exercise through which she tries to do with her brain what a physical therapist does with a weakened limb. Her distribution of her memories into rooms, corridors, and galleries, like her gathering of her thoughts into words, sentences, and chapters, represents an attempt to create order out of chaos and meaning out of confusion. Her memoir confronts us with the surprising revelation that we are our brains, and that while being a brain might be a scary and dangerous thing to be, brains are also capable of transcendent acts of beauty, endurance, and love.